Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking to Brent Feldman. Brent is the CEO of Matchbox Design Group and the host of Mix and Matchbox. Brent founded his digital marketing agency, Matchbox Design Group, in 2006 with a business partner. That means he's been in business for over 17 years. And he and his team are on a mission to make the web better and make it more accessible because the internet, the web, is meant for everyone. Hope you enjoy this conversation about lateral thinking and how to leverage it to solve complex problems. Brent, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thank you very much. Good to be here.
Specialists versus generalists. This has been like, gotta niche down, be super well known for what you do. You can charge a premium for it. But then on the other side, I also know that being a generalist and knowing a lot of different peripheral analogous ideas that from different industries, different disciplines, different thought patterns, and different pieces that can be applied and tested into other areas of life, other areas of business. First, I want to understand, what is your frame of mind around the specialist? You got to niche down, be very specific, good at one thing only or a couple things only. And I know we talk about like the T-shaped marketer, like broad but very specific, or also like the generalist view. What's your consensus, or what are you seeing there?
Yeah, I love that question, and I am a big proponent for the generalist. One of my favorite books, and it was recommended to me from all people. It was actually from my mom, but it's a David Epstein book called Range, and there's so many examples in the book in terms of experience and sort of things that you can sort of like
Hmm.
learn along the way from being like a generalist and being interested in a whole bunch of different things. But I think one of my favorite examples of like stories was the fact that like NASA had this program that they had unanswered questions and they would log them, and essentially they put out this sort of these questions out to the masses. And when they did, they got responses from like lawyers and architects and all sorts of people that NASA is probably employing some of the smartest people in the entire world, and definitely brilliant mathematicians, scientists, and they still had questions they couldn't answer. But
Hmm.
when they put it out to maybe everybody else who wasn't doing that type of work all day long, they yielded sometimes answers to these decades old questions.
Hmm.
And so at the end of the day, I feel like I'm a proponent of being a generalist, because of the vision it gives you, of the lens that it provides, being able to see so many different things and experience so many different things and bring that to the table. And maybe sometimes those tough questions really just need a different perspective. And
Hmm.
that's why I feel like that generalist approach is very helpful. In terms of niching down, though, I feel like it helps. Like you always have to have those specialists. And
Hmm.
maybe you yourself may not have to be that person, but I feel like it's a balance of both worlds. Like you need the specialists to do the things that they're very good at. But you definitely better to hone your craft into, if it's not necessarily an industry, let's say from an agency perspective, at least the types of work you do, that definitely helps. But also being a generalist, and especially in terms of like, let's say, all the different types of companies that we serve, I feel like being agnostic sometimes to it gives you so much more that you can provide to the next person based on all this visibility that you have.
That kind of reminds me a lot of I think it was the hedgehog concept from Jim Collins, but the example was that is, this obviously is old, but the example of the book was IBM and or Procter and Gamble. Is the special thing you do the product, the end product, or is the special thing you do the process to create that end product? And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. Versus maybe it's not an or question of specialist or generalists. Maybe it's an and question of like, be very very wide in your depth of knowledge and breadth of understanding.
Mhm.
But in the application, you can either be very specific in the application. Remember, your thing is being able to take that knowledge and solve specific problems. So your competitive advantage isn't the how you do things
Mhm.
versus like being a traditional specialist of taking your depth of knowledge to solve one specific product or problem and being like the product specific, making like substantial products in the marketplace or like a lot of products in the marketplace and being a specialist that way. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I Definitely. And I feel like it can definitely apply sort of either way you approach it.
Mm.
But absolutely. Like it's one of those interesting things that like seeing having experience in multiple different facets, jumping in from multiple different angles, or knowing the right people to bridge in at the right time
Hmm.
can
Yeah.
in order to like how you approach solving a problem, I feel like is super helpful.
I got another book to read then, Range. The interesting part about the work that you're doing, and like I mentioned off the call that I've been in agency world since 2016, in and out, running my own building, helping others grow, etc. You see a lot of cool clients. You work
Mhm.
with a lot of cool companies, different business models, different products, different offerings, different pieces they're solving for the marketplace. And you're able to almost get like, I don't even want to say like an MBA because that's like minimalizing it, but you're able to get a huge depth of knowledge for very specific niches or industries very quickly because you see what's working, what's not working. How do you take that learning from one specific aspect of a client or a product or a campaign and then have the courage or the guts to framework it out and then test it somewhere else? Because it's always going to be a test. Like, hey, this worked over here. It might fail over here on the other plays. But what's your process for that? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like that kind of process is also the most exciting thing about being able to test out theories. I mean, theoretically, every single time that you go into a situation where you're like, hey, I need to find a way to solve this problem, whether it's
Mhm.
like getting more leads or views or getting more activity, it's about using sort of prior experience in order to get to that sort of point. And you build up this sort of like list of ideas and recommendations and things in the back of your mind of like, oh, this is what I might do here based on something that that we've sort of tried before. Obviously there's maybe a little bit of creative spark and a little bit of like intuition that all gets mixed up, and then you're like, hey, this is how we're going to potentially approach it. But building that catalog of like different things that you can approach it with, I feel like is super important. And having, you mentioned like having the guts to try it somewhere else, it's it's interesting because I almost feel like what's the alternative maybe? That if you don't end up trying to put forth a different sort of solution to a problem, or like you don't end up pulling based off like your own experience, like really what do you necessarily have to lend towards it? So I feel like almost like you have to continue taking those risks, you have to continue learning, you have to kind of continue building up those catalog of tactics, and really just finding the way to apply it in every single situation. Is there sort of any routine or process to it? I bet there probably could be. I feel like this is, sometimes right case, right time, right scenario in terms of, hey, this seemed to work for this. Maybe the same thing can work here too. So yeah, just
Interesting.
continually reapplying.
Well, tell me about your because you focus a lot on the relationship, and I think you leverage that insight in that relationship with different business owners to be able to solve. I mean, in the world of marketing, there's always going to be the same problems. The problems are old. The ways of solving them might change. They're new. You're leveraging something different. What I'm hearing from a lot of different other like information out there, you're leveraging and honing in on the relationship first to
Mhm.
solve the same problems at a deeper level. Like, why go there, and what is the relationship unlock for you?
Yeah. I feel like the relationship is the way to get to the center of the problem.
Mm.
Because if nobody is revealing what the actual true source of the issue is, I feel like it's extraordinarily hard to find the right solve. And sometimes that's talking about like it maybe not what the surface issue is, like, okay, let's say that you're trying to solve a visibility problem. Well, does that mean that the messaging's wrong? Does that mean like their conception about where they should be in the marketplace is potentially wrong? The more that gets revealed through the relationship in general, the more they're willing to trust, invest in obviously your resources, your expertise. I feel like that's where you can get more breakthroughs, because if you don't have that sort of like deep level of trust, if you aren't getting to like the root cause of the issue, you can't really solve the right problem.
Mm.
And relationships are, they're so critical in order to make sure that you're doing that effectively.
Well, talk me through that because like, usually I see the problem within the problem, like you're mentioning. That's the like a lack of sales or a lack of conversions is not the actual problem. There's a lot more behind that. Obviously, there's a technical front, but then there's also the personal front. Like, how do you actually tango with the client and your team to get that?
Yeah, definitely. One actually is I'll give this as a recent experience. Talking to a nonprofit, they were looking to find ways to reach underserved communities. And the biggest thing is nobody on their staff or their team were looked like those communities they were trying to serve.
Mhm.
And so one of the biggest things was trying to find out, okay, that is great that you want to be there, but how can you serve that audience better? Learn about that audience. That's where you can either talk to maybe teachers, coaches, churches, people that are in the community. You find out what their sensibilities are, what they're interested in, what they're needing. And then
Mm.
once you have a better idea of exactly what that audience is looking for, what they care about, and how you can potentially serve them, I feel like it's doing that investigation and the research to provide a solution that is going to be effective and really caters to the needs of that audience. And if you don't put in the time to do that research, whether it's demographic research, psychographic research, competitive research, you're just throwing things at a wall. And so I feel like a big part of it is doing that upfront investigation, making sure that exactly what you're trying to hit. And I know that touches on the relationship, but really it's also just due diligence, making sure
Mhm.
that you're digging in, you're figuring out where you need to put your efforts and time.
No, I hear that. I hear that. It's obviously the core principles, but also leveraging and that's just it's more than leveraging, just like having that intuitive sense, I think, to connect the
Mhm.
dots when you're actually working with the client. You're seeing a lot of cool and interesting things. Like, what are some of the, I don't want to go like just into trends, but what are some of the themes or interesting business models or interesting offers or just changes that you're seeing in general in the marketplace that have piqued your interest? Maybe you haven't solved yet, or maybe you have solved. Like, what are the things that are like top of mind right now that got you curious and wanting to dig more?
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know, everybody says it, but I mean, like, I'm fascinated at how different industries are leveraging AI.
Mhm.
Because, like, as a marketing company, we started picking it up late last year. So, actually, kind of like a year ago this time. And some of the early things that we were doing with it were to like flesh out here's blog posts or titles. And obviously, then you know, like more documents and all just larger and larger things that you're able to like create from just a tech standpoint. Certainly the image generation stuff is neat, but the way I hear people talking about it and what is fascinating is like how does this apply to manufacturing? What sort of things can you glean out of the data? And the more I feel like that AI is accessible to people, that means more people are going to have different ways of how they might manipulate it to achieve the results that they're looking for. One of the things that I feel like is like extraordinarily cool is just that you can run spreadsheets inside of ChatGPT. So let's say that that's anything from SEO data to manufacturing data. If you're
Mhm.
wondering where some losses are based on like let's say IoT systems that you've got checking the manufacturing data, you're like, "Oh, okay, it looks like the time period from here to here, we actually had a decline in production." So instead of you taking the time to review the spreadsheet and all of this data, you literally look to AI to provide a second set of eyes on what is that intuition. Because just
Mm.
as any unique person is like looking at that set of data and they have their own perspectives of what they might be searching for, asking another theoretically it's like asking multiple other people of like, well, what do you see in this, where are the trends
Mm.
here? And having AI do that kind of like maybe assumptive guessing based on data and trends that it sees, I feel like it could yield so much possibility for so many different industries. I give manufacturing as one option, but anybody that outputs or can output data in a spreadsheet, I feel like there's fascinating things to be revealed. Data scientists are wonderful, and I don't think that means their job is going away
Yeah.
by any means. But you know, having that input from a third party or you know, I feel like is super cool.
It's pretty interesting too. But the key thing is always what are the questions that need to be answered? And I think that's the arts to figure out, going back to your relationship comment, like how do you hone into that, glean insight? and understand what are the actual questions I should be asking, because it's still the same of input output. If you say, hey, just analyze this for me, it'll give you a good output. But if you know specifically, like maybe you want to do a projection or a model, or maybe you want to have different variables come in, like you need to know exactly what you want.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's kind of like augmenting, and it made me just think of the thing with like with range, and like you have these generalists. Well, can you imagine if you mix the power of that generalist with the data science capacity that maybe that person didn't have at their disposal?
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, that's yielding new questions that can be asked to bring back new results. So I just feel like the power of what that's kind of bringing to the table based on, yeah, people that may not have that specific sort of like expertise, it will hopefully just generate lots of cool new opportunities.
It's like the 10x. Oh, they have like 10x developers. This is the 10x generalist or the 100x generalist now.
Totally.
It's pretty
Exactly.
interesting. I
Yeah.
love it.
I wanted to add that the best thing I ever saw about like people leveraging ChatGPT, obviously it was like everybody use it, but it was like treat it as your overqualified intern. Maybe don't believe everything it says,
uh,
but treating it as though it can do so many things and just put it to work.
One day it'll bring me coffee. We'll see.
Yeah.
I love it. Where's the best place for people to go to reach out to you, to hit you up, to say thank you for the pod, and to learn more about what you're up to?
I would say definitely matchboxdesigngroup.com, Mix and Matchbox, which is our podcast. And definitely, yeah, I am B Feldman at matchboxdesigngroup.com. Definitely feel free to give me an email, LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. Yeah, I got it early. I am basically Brent Feldman / Brent Feldman. So yeah, all those ways would be perfect.
Back when LinkedIn was just a resume builder.
Yeah, definitely. Everybody was just connecting with everybody. It was the Wild West.
Oh, I remember those days. Brent, we'll put those links in the show notes. Thanks for being on.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
If you found value in today's podcast, please consider sharing this with someone that you believe could also benefit from this episode. You never know, you may be the catalyst that opens them up to a new way of operating their business and experiencing life. As always, it's an honor to be a small part of your journey. This is Raul Hernandez. Do good work.